a livelihood for many people. Keeping them healthy, productive, and safe is every farmer's dream. One organization in Zimbabwe is helping farmers realize these dreams. This is Asaki Online. Welcome to Agriculture on Site. My guest today is Max Makuvise, a seasoned cattleman and a technology innovator. He is the co-founder of E-Livestock Global, a startup that uses blockchain technology to help farmers keep track of the health and location of their cattle. Max, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Right, great. Maybe let's just restart it at the beginning. What inspired you to actually create a cattle traceability system using blockchain technology? Maybe can you just share a moment where you realized that this is a solution?
Yes, first and foremost, I think a lot of our farmers, and I mainly base what I'm saying on the smallholder farmer because that's nearest and dearest to my heart, formerly not part of the system. Now, whilst they may have cattle card, and I'm glad that the government has introduced digital stock cards, they weren't quite part of the system and they became price takers as opposed to price givers. And one of the things we had an issue a few years ago where we wanted to know particularly where payments were coming and were not coming in terms of us as suppliers of dip chemicals at the time. And one was because they didn't know who particularly was paying and who wasn't paying. So, we thought it's good to have a system where we can find out who's paying and who's not paying. But then we said, but it's more important that it's not about a financial transaction anymore. It's about how healthy are the farmers' cattle, I should say, and do they have more access to market? Now, blockchain, obviously, it was at the time, a few years ago, going back 3 or 4 years, was the end thing. And not just that, but it's what it could do. That record which can't be broken, which to reverse it takes an absolute mammoth task. So people couldn't just go in and reverse the transaction system. Once it's there, it's there. And as with cell phone technology, if, for argument's sake, Zimbabwe didn't have any mobile network, and today they decided to get a mobile network, the expectation is that they would go to 5G. They wouldn't go back to the beginning, to 2G, and then go 3G, 4G, 5G. They'd start at 5G. So this is the latest technology. This is what the world is using. And when it comes to traceability globally, blockchain is the standard. So that's why we decided to go with the blockchain system.
Right, wonderful. For viewers who may not know, what really is blockchain and how does it work? And how different is this from a traditional databases when you talk about livestock management?
Well, we've created an international database. So what we're doing in Zimbabwe is applicable globally. The reason why we're called E-Livestock Global is that we're a global traceability firm. So we're not restricting what we've done to Zimbabwean cattle. This is a global platform. And with the blockchain, I'm not going to get overly technical because I might make some mistakes in explaining it. But what happens is when you do a transaction, there's a key generated. And that key is the key to that transaction. But as I said, it's like, for example, if you and I get into a transaction and there's just the two of us, it's very easy for one of us to renege on the transaction or to reverse the transaction. However, if we find ourselves in a situation where you have to speak to somebody next to you, have to speak to somebody next to them, and I have to speak to somebody there, and there are maybe 12 people between you and me approving the transaction that goes along. You and I can't suddenly just sit and say, oh no, we're canceling it. We have to reverse the entire transaction, which means going through every single person to get their permission to remove it. And that's one of the great things about blockchain, which is why it makes the record hard, solid, and it can't just be reversed or deleted because there are so many steps to create that transaction in the first place. Even though it might just be you and I shaking hands, to get to the actual transaction taking place, there are many people involved. And that's what the blockchain is. It provides a secure record. You can't tamper with it. I can't suddenly change the color of the animal from green to blue, for argument's sake, on a blockchain system. If I put it in as green, it's green. A perfect example is, and they may not be on blockchain, is the VID. You get a license plate, and the license plate comes with a logbook, and in the logbook, it describes the color of the car. So it's a green Honda Fit. You get to a roadblock, and the policeman looks into his system, and it says green Honda Fit. However, the car you're driving is a blue Honda Fit. So if somebody's made a mistake at the beginning, that mistake remains forever. What you have to do is take that license plate out of existence and issue a new license plate and re-register the vehicle. So that makes it hard for people to just go into a record and say, okay, I'm painting my car blue. And then someone just goes to the computer and presses blue. It doesn't quite work like that.
Right. That's interesting. So you cannot even tinker with the system. It is it's foolproof or theft-proof in a way.
Yeah. Once you enter an animal into the system, the description and the details alongside the tag number of that animal are there for life. There's no changing that.
Right. Walk us through what happens. Like, for example, say if a calf is born, how does that event end up being recorded on the blockchain, and why is that important for traceability?
Okay, so before I get to the actual calf, I think let's get to the system itself. So what are we doing? First of all, you're registering a farmer as an individual or as a corporate. So you represent the body that owns the cattle. So that's the first thing you need to register. You need to register. So that will be enabling you to have proof of ownership. And I'll just digress somewhat slightly in there. When we do put the cattle in, which I'll go through a bit just now, you have cattle in herds. And the way we not define, we set up the system is that you have different herds. So if you're in a commercial environment, you might have Brahman bull, Brahman heifer, Brahman cow, Brahman steer. Those would be your different herds. And that's what you're using to describe your animal. But we've set it up in twofold. So you have commercial, which are those people who do not rely on government for dipping services. And then we have what we call communal herd, which is people who rely on government for dipping. Okay. Now, within the communal herd, each farmer is a farm. However, his herds can be father, mother, son, daughter, what have you. And the reason we've done that is because, some of our traditional practices, when we marry off our daughters, my wife gets a cow, and that cow will have calves, and those belong to my wife. So if something were to happen to me, for argument's sake, my family, as in my family on my birthline family, can't come and suddenly take all the cattle, because some of those cattle belong to my wife. And the beauty of Zimbabwe is for stock theft, the penalty is 9 years. So it's a good deterrent, because we've heard many stories of widows who have had the entire herd taken, even though within that herd were her cattle that were her. But the family just said, no, this is our brother's cattle, we're taking them all. So proof of ownership, that's the first thing. I'll talk about the police modules and the veterinary modules a bit later. The next thing is location. Cattle need to be somewhere. Unlike a vehicle that can travel the lengths and breadths of the country, cattle are susceptible to diseases, receiving and spreading. So they have to be somewhere. So what we do is we register cattle to a dip tank. Okay. In the rural areas, that's really great, because they dip, for example, every second Thursday or every Thursday in the rainy season. So those cattle are registered to that point, okay, and to a farmer. So when they dip, they're expected to dip at that tank. They're not expected to dip at a tank 10 kilometers away. Otherwise, that raises questions. So you locate the animal. Then you now move to the actual animal. And let's come to your example of your calf. A calf is born. And the first things we say, we ask are, is it a newborn or is it an addition? So it's normally a newborn if it's a calf. If it's an adult, it's an addition. So you say, you assign it a tag number, okay, which is the number starts with 716 for Zimbabwe, but that number can only be used once, and it cannot be transferred to another animal. You're registering it to this animal. it'll ask you who the mother is. Now, being a calf, it's very straightforward and simple. It'll be with its mother suckling. So you can put the mother's tag number down. So you can now say that's the mother. For the father, sometimes you don't know. It could be, there could be 5 bulls in a paddock with 200 cows. You don't know which one is the father. So you can leave that blank. It's a multi-sire animal. But what you've now done is you've now created a record whereby there's a newborn calf, you put its color and other details in, but you also put its mother. So like a human birth certificate, you're born of someone, okay? The beauty of that is, as a commercial farmer or a rural farmer, you can then turn around and say, cow number 012, how many calves has it had? And then you can list how many calves it's had over the years. And then suddenly you can pick up, this one's a really good performer, this one isn't. So that's how you register the calf. Now that calf's record is fixed, okay? So it's like a license plate. But then if you look at modern day car companies, I keep using analogies in everything I do. Modern day car companies, you buy a new car. So you go and you buy a new Ford Ranger from Julie's, for argument's sake. What happens is it'll come with some warranty plan. And every time you take it to Julie's for service, in their little computer, they'll put registration this, had changed the right tire, right light bulb on the headlights, change the oil, all the things you did to the vehicle. And you are now building up a record of what's happened to that car. So suddenly, if I have the car and I sell it to you, you can actually go to Julie's and say, can I have a record of this car? I want to see whether Max was actually servicing it every year or was he not? And they can say, well, according to our records, this car's never been serviced and it's 5 years old. So it would be very hesitant for you to buy this vehicle. It's a similar thing with the cattle. Every time you dip, you put that into the system. Every time you dose, you put that into the system. If you vaccinate, you can put it into the system. If you weigh the cattle, you can put it into the system. So you're now building up a clear image of what the animal has done during its life. And the other thing is, when you do it, when you're at the cattle, if you use a scanner for argument's sake, you're in a situation where it geolocates. So it tells you this animal was scanned at this particular point. Now, where that's particularly interesting is, for example, if someone's friends with a veterinary officer and they can't be bothered to take their cattle to the dip tank tomorrow, so they literally drive their cattle past his office because they live, say, for example, by the shops, and he scans and says, "Yep, we dipped them." It'll say they were dipped at the growth point. And people will say, but hold on a second, there is no dip there, the dip's over there. So you can pick up that the cattle were dipped where they weren't supposed to be dipped, where there is no dip tank, for example. There are differences in that you can have mobile spray racers, but then when you register the dip tank, you register it as a mobile spray race, which allows it to move, as opposed to a plunge dip tank or a stationary spray race, which has a geographical coordinate. So that's basically, in a very small way, what you can do when you tag a calf.
Right. Interesting, Max, because already with that tagging and the availability of a record of of the cow and the calf is already adding value for the farmer in terms, one, of disease surveillance, and two, I'm now even intrigued to find out now, can this system really make cows bankable? Become an asset?
Most definitely. We're working with a large insurance company. I can't divulge the name of it. It'll be going online very soon, the program. And what we're looking at is collateralization of cattle. So if you look at most African countries, the World Bank has helped establish collateral banks, or whatever they call them. And what that means is that certain assets can be collateralized. Now, I know in Zimbabwe, cattle can be collateralized. But unfortunately, the banks don't quite have a system by which they can collateralize the animal, because what could happen one day is, they're coming to collateralize my animal, they come and they see 15 animals, and then I take those 15 animals to your farm, and they come and see the same 15 animals. They collateralize the same 15 animals against 2 people and give us both loans. Now, under that system, what we do is we create an equal farm in the same place, belonging to the insurance company, for argument's sake. So if they're financing you, if they've got a microfinance company, the cattle are transferred from your name to the insurance company's name, but at your farm. And the reason for doing that is because our system, and I'll get to this, we'll probably get it later, but I'll get to it now, is modeled on a system whereby you cannot move animals from one place to another without the consent of the vet department.
Yes.
So we have in the system a veterinary module. So for me to move cattle to you, there's a movement permit, yes, but also within the system, the vet has to see, okay, which are the animals that are being moved, okay? You can see the tag numbers. You can click on an individual animal, see its dipping history, its description, all those sorts of things. And then you can say, tick, these animals can travel. Once that's the case, they sit in the cloud somewhere, waiting for you to then accept them onto your farm, because I've sold them to you. So, it's quite good that it involves the veterinary department, it involves the police, it involves a whole host of players to make sure that cattle can be collateralized. And if it does say these cattle belong to a bank, they can say, why are these cattle over there, yet they belong to bank, whatever the name of the bank is. And as far as we're concerned, the farm relating to them, which is your farm because they're collateralized against you, is in Binga, but these animals are in Dotito. How does that work? Then the police can now start getting suspicious and investigations can follow.
Wow, that's definitely a plus, because it's bringing that security element, which then actually brings me to the really next question of the troubling challenge that farmers face. Cattle theft is a concern for many communities, across Africa, and more so specifically in Zimbabwe. I think the last records I just checked, the Zimbabwe Farmers Union estimated that we are losing something like about 40,000 cattle annually, which are worth a good well over $100 million. I'm wondering here, can you maybe just give us an example of how this system can or would stop animals from being actually bought or sold?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet. It's like a vehicle, for example. If somebody steals a vehicle and changes the number plate, I may not recognize it. But basically what we are doing is we're giving the farmer a chance. So if an animal is tagged and it has an air tag on it, and all the animals in the area have an air tag on them, basically a cattle rustler will have to cut the ear off to take the tag off, which, sad enough, sometimes maybe they do things like that, but you can never completely defend against it. But what we can do is put information into the system. And I'll give you two examples where it has worked. For example, on one farm, what happened was one of the bulls strayed and it went across the river and went about 10 k's away into another village. So it went into the herd, and this guy said, I don't know where these cattle have come from. But at some stage, his uncle came to the village or walked past and saw the cattle and then phoned us and said, we've got a bull here. We think it might be yours. And then we said, does it have an air tag on it? And they said, yes. And we said, okay, can you give us the 15-digit code? They gave it to us. We punched it into our phones. Nguni bull, black and white, born on this date. So we went across there to pick up our bull with the policeman, just, to make sure it was done. There was no rustling involved or anything. It was purely an animal that had strayed. But we were able to get it back. Otherwise, it would have been lost forever. Okay, that's the first thing. A second one is, and this actually is a real life scenario, well, real case that happened is 2 years ago, an animal was stolen and was slaughtered. And what they then did is they took the ear tags and they threw them into the fire. Plastic melted, but the RFID chip remained intact. We were then able to scan that tag and say that was that particular animal that belonged to that particular guy. The animal had gone and had been slaughtered, had been killed for meat and everything. But we were able to prove that that particular animal was one of the animals that had been slaughtered. And we've actually, the commissioner in charge of anti-stock theft, we showed it to him and his staff in the field close to where it had happened, and said, look, you can't read this tag. We took the scanner, we read the tag, and we said, that's it. That's the animal that was stolen. Obviously, there was a police case 2 years ago, but you could prove that the animal was stolen. And the hope is that if every animal is tagged, you'll soon get to a stage where it's harder for people to cut off ear tags and put other things on.
The one thing which makes my heart bleed a lot is a lot of people are slaughtering in situ and taking parts of meat and then running away. And so they don't take the whole animal, they just take what they want. And, that's something I'd like to see end, but that's just the vigilance of farmers. There's no traceability system in the world that's going to be able to stop that. I mean, the more expensive collared systems, you'll collar one animal, but Zimbabweans being the enterprising people they are, you have 30 animals in your herd, one with a collar, they'll leave the one and take the 29. They'll see something on it and say, no, this one, we don't know what's on its neck. We're going to leave that one there and we're going to take the rest. So, yeah, it is a big problem. Wars have been started over cattle in the Northern Africa. And I just think that if we have an identification system, it will make it easier because only maybe the most hardened criminals will continue. Others will say it's a bit too risky because of the form of identification. So stock theft, whilst it can't be completely taken away, I think we can put a dent in it.